Hello everyone and welcome to Cine 104, History of Motion Pictures 1945 to Present. This is Class 11 and I am Professor Dave Eccles, and we are working our way through the 80s and 90s, and we got some great stuff today. Oliver Stone and Tim Burton and the Coen Brothers. And I'd like to make a note that if you're taking this class, normally we would have had a test before this lecture. So if you are taking this class in college, then you should have taken the class, and then this class 11 would be on the next test. So again, you should take test 2 before this class. All right, let's dive in to Oliver Stone. Director, 2 directing Oscars. That's pretty good. No one directing today has more than that. Steven Spielberg and a couple of others have 2 Oscars. No one more than that. So that's a sign of respect in the Hollywood community, if nothing else. Oliver Stone is provocative, and controversial. Those would be 2 key words for him. He does manage to pick subjects that are a little bit controversial, whether socially or politically or whatever, partly because he deals with films from around the 1960s, Vietnam and things like that, and also the media. He's also known, at least for about 3 or 4 or 5 films that he made in the early 1990s, of really pushing the boundaries of editing. And that was taken up later on by music videos and television, but he and his editors, and he was really pushing his editors, so he'd say more, faster, faster, jump cuts, multiple formats. And multiple formats means that he's not just using standard 35 millimeter color film. And what we see today, digital formats, resembles 35 millimeter color film quite a bit. But what he was doing in the 90s was black and white film, 16 millimeter film, Super 8 film, and all of that. So he's just kind of putting them all together, chopping it all up, breaking all sorts of rules and everything. And we have some nice links to all of that to get a chance to see. It's hard to describe, really, so you'll get a chance to see what he's doing with the editing. So he began as a writer, like so many directors have done, Woody Allen and people like that. Coen Brothers kind of began writing, and Preston Sturges, lots of directors began as writers. Some began as actors, like Clint Eastwood, people like that. Oliver Stone began as a writer, and like a lot of writers, thought he could do a better job of visualizing and filming his screenplays. And eventually he got a chance. Platoon, I think it's about his 3rd film or so, and he won the Best Picture Oscar and Directing Oscar for that. His 2nd directing Oscar, I believe, was for Born on the 4th of July. He also did Wall Street. Michael Douglas won the Best Acting Oscar for that, and he did The Doors. And again, I don't want to make too big of a deal about the whole Oscar thing. There are so many great movies that didn't win Oscars. It is a nice sign of respect. I'm sure every actor or director or anybody who wins an Oscar is very happy for that. But it is not the only measure of greatness that we have. Stanley Kubrick, 2001, Dr. Strangelove, Clockwork Orange, didn't win Oscars for any of those. Orson Welles didn't win for directing or picture of Citizen Kane, and there are dozens and dozens of examples of directors and actors. Cary Grant never won an Oscar. So there's lots of examples of people who didn't win Oscars. So I don't want to make too big of a deal about it, but I know that it is a good sign of respect from your peers in the Academy. So we'll sort of take it as a mixture. It's cool to get one, but it's not the biggest tragedy in the world to not get one either. You're in pretty good company if you have not won an Oscar for in your chosen field. So JFK, I like to focus in on that one for a little bit. From 1990, and it does have the multiple formats, and it has really the extreme editing, and it is provocative and controversial. JFK, those were the initials of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, in November of 1963. And it's not really about JFK and the assassination so much as it's about the investigation into all of that about 10 years later. And in New Orleans, there was a district attorney. His name was Jim Garrison. District attorneys have lots of lawyers on their staff and investigators and detectives and all of that. And he decided he wanted to look into it. A lot of the people that were part of the Kennedy assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby and people like that, had gone through New Orleans. So he thought it was something that he should be looking into. And this is one of the very first great conspiracy theories that we have. There's lots of conspiracy theories going back to, did we even land on the moon? Did some people know about the attacks on 9/11? And there are lots of conspiracy theories out there, lots and lots. And this is one of the very first ones, going way back to the 1960s. And the key question for a lot of theorists was, how could Lee Harvey Oswald have done it alone? It required a lot of planning, even the shooting from the book depository across the street and up high and everything, a moving target. Kennedy was in a convertible traveling along, not very fast, but he was in a convertible traveling along. Oswald's gun was bolt action, which means you have to manually put the bullet into the chamber each time. It's not automatic. You can't just pull your finger, bang, bang, bang. But you gotta take that bolt and put it in. So he got all those shots off on his own. How could he possibly have done it? Was it the Russians? Was it the Cubans? Was it the CIA? Was it the mob? Those are the main ones, and there's probably more too. But certainly, 1963, the height of the Cold War, and we had just had the Bay of Pigs incident in Cuba, where we funded some counter-revolutionaries to go back into Cuba to take over the country from Castro. And now this is the Cubans getting back at us. Possibly it's the Russians. Again, mafia, all that, CIA, whatever. So there's a lot of that going on. And it was pretty much done by 1990. And here Oliver Stone comes in. He makes his film asking all these questions all over again, pointing up inconsistencies in this report. The report that they refer to in the film, and it was fairly well known, was called the Warren Commission Report. And after Kennedy was assassinated, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, put together a blue ribbon panel headed by the Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren. And they got the head of the FBI and the head of this and that and the other and outside people and so on. And they put out this, they researched and investigated for a year or so, maybe two, and put out this commission report, hundreds of pages, maybe even 1,000 pages. So they're going to refer to the Warren Commission all throughout this film. And that's what they're referring to, this blue ribbon panel headed by Earl Warren. So check that out. This would be a good time, really, just to stop this part, stop me, and go over to the link and check out the links that I have for JFK and it's a pretty good one. Or you can wait till we're done with Oliver Stone. We have a couple more movies to talk about. He also did the very controversial Natural Born Killers, and it's very violent, and a lot of people are just thinking that it's violence, and to me it reminds me a lot of A Clockwork Orange, where it looks like some murderous types are having a good time, and sex and violence and music, and there's little bits of animation, all sorts of stuff floating through there, and he's glorifying violence, just like people said that Kubrick was doing, glorifying violence. But really, when you look underneath, Kubrick was talking about free will, and Oliver Stone is doing a satire on media and fame, and how these two serial killers are on the cover of magazines, and they're on the news, and they're on TV shows, and all of that, and that's the deeper message for Natural Born Killers. So Oliver Stone also did Nixon, about the President Nixon, 1960s, Any Given Sunday, about professional football, Savages, about drugs, crossing the border north and south between the U.S. and Mexico, Mexican drug lords, things like that, and Snowden, about the NSA young man that leaked all of those documents. So all pretty controversial stuff, and there are a few other films as well. A number of them deal with the 1960s, the Vietnam War films like Platoon and Born on the 4th of July, and there's another one. And then The Doors, also about the 1960s, with Jim Morrison and The Doors, and drugs and sex and all that kind of stuff. So Oliver Stone came. I'm sort of going back here, looping back around for Oliver Stone. He came from a pretty good family, upper middle class, and during the Vietnam War, most young men who were from upper middle class type families who didn't want to go to Vietnam could find a way out, either go to college, which was probably the most popular way, but that was good for about 4 years or so. You had to be a full-time student. If you were from a really good family, you could probably find a doctor who could find something to keep you out. A number of our presidents, current and former, found doctors and things, and bone spurs and asthma and various ways to stay out of the Vietnam War. But Oliver Stone, he volunteered, and he went in and saw combat. He wasn't just in the background being a photographer or a newspaper or something like that. He was right in there. He was right in the platoons, in the jungle, all that. He got a lot of material for a number of films that he did. The two Vietnam War films in particular, Platoon and Born on the 4th of July. Another one set peripherally to Vietnam, about a young Vietnamese girl and her voyage to America and Orange County. And like I said, and then the Doors from the 60s, and Nixon from the 60s, and JFK peripherally about the 60s, because it's mostly set in this investigation taking place in the 70s and 80s. Okay, so check out Oliver Stone, Natural Born Killers, and the fictitious television documentary American Maniacs, and then come back and we will dive into Tim Burton. So Tim Burton, one of the directors that most of my students know before taking this class or any of my classes. There are a few, if you're not a real film fan, I have plenty of students who know plenty of directors, but oftentimes I get students who are taking these classes for general ed. They're not big film fans. They know a few. They know Quentin Tarantino, and they know Tim Burton, and not too many other directors really. And so Tim Burton is one of those directors that is generally known by most of my students. Maybe not all of them, but generally known by most of my students. Tim Burton from Southern California, grew up in Burbank. Big fan of old horror films, going back to Dracula and Frankenstein and things like that, and the wonderful films that were made in Great Britain in the 1950s and 1960s. So a lot of that stuff seeps in to his films, and the subject matter and some of the actors that were in those films. He brings them in to be in his films as well. And there he is with Johnny Depp in Edward Scissorhands. They worked together 9 times by my count. I don't know if I'm missing anything or not, but 9 times. And with composer Danny Elfman, 19 and counting. And I'm a big fan of both of these men. Johnny Depp, I think, is a lot of fun, always fun to watch. And Danny Elfman was the front for the band Oingo Boingo, and I was a big Boingo fan back in the day, and I always saw them at their Halloween show down at Irvine Meadows. And so he left rock and roll, got into composing, and everybody knows Danny Elfman because he did the theme to The Simpsons, among lots of other stuff, but mostly he's working on feature films. Johnny and Tim got together very luckily because they both kind of needed each other. And by that I mean very much in the same way that Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro really needed each other. Both directors, Scorsese and Burton, were young, just starting out, really trying to make their mark in the world. And you really need people to help you visualize or help you realize your vision. And Scorsese really needed Robert De Niro. He had some good stuff, but if in the hands of a mediocre actor, no matter how good of a director you are and so on, you're just not going to get noticed. And the same thing for Tim Burton. He had these odd, quirky films that he wanted to make, and he really needed an actor who could help pull that off. And Johnny Depp was on television, 21 Jump Street, playing a cop, a young 20-something-year-old cop who goes underground in high schools and colleges and things like that. And he wanted to start making feature films, and he didn't want to just be the young romantic lead. Johnny's a really good-looking guy, just like Brad Pitt and Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio, and none of those guys wanted to be a pretty boy, right? None of them wanted to be the one that was just the romantic lead. And women have this same problem, even more so. It's society, it's Hollywood, but women age out of that sort of thing very, very fast. If you are known for your beauty, by the time you hit 30 or 35, a lot of those roles are going to go away. And so the smart actors and actresses want to do a little bit more than just being the love interest. For women, there's a bit more of a double standard. A lot of those men that I just mentioned, Johnny and Matt and people like that, they're like Johnny's in his 50s, Brad Pitt's in his 50s, Leo's in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, Matt Damon's in his 40s, and yet they still get to play the romantic lead. But most women in their 40s and 50s have a much harder time. I won't say it's impossible, but they have a much harder time playing the romantic lead, and that is a double standard. Double standard. We've been talking about double standard for a while. We'll probably come back, circle around back on it again. But seeing Johnny right there, I thought I'd bring it up. So some more Tim Burton films: Beetlejuice, Batman. Beetlejuice was the one that kind of helped him get noticed. Before that, his first film was actually Pee-wee's Big Adventure, based on Pee-wee Herman and his kids show. Most people were thinking about it being a Pee-wee Herman film, but Tim Burton was a really good choice for that film. He does have a very distinct look, I think, in large part because he studied animation at Cal Arts. That's the college that the Disney family helped found. They wanted a conduit of good top-notch animators that they could bring into at Disney. You don't have to work at Disney, of course, after Cal Arts, but they wanted a school that could really take young people and up their animation game, starting with ink and paint and all that, and certainly getting into 3D Pixar type animation, all that. So Edward Scissorhands is one of the films I wanted to hone in on. Early work with both Tim and Johnny. It has a framing device. We always mention when any of our films have a framing device. It's sort of rare in movies, and anything that's rare in movies I like to highlight. Of course, in this class, it's not so rare. I tend to focus in on interesting narrative devices and things like that. So this film does have a framing device beginning somewhere in what may or may not be the present, and we see a old lady, grandma, reading a bedtime story to her, I assume, granddaughter. And the grandma is played by Winona Ryder under a lot of makeup, and she's going to tell the story of Edward Scissorhands. Interestingly, we're going to go way back in time. If the grandmother looks to be 75 or 80, then we'd have to be going back about 50 years or so. But when we go back 50 years, it looks like the 1990s. So it's just movie magic. What you get to do, right, when you make movies. Everything doesn't have to make sense. And this time, long ago, when Winona Ryder was a high school student, looks very much like 1990 when the movie was made. And has a very interesting look. Tim was from Burbank, and he lived in those sorts of housing developments and things where so many of the houses are all lined up the streets, all kind of look similar. And so when we see this fictitious town where Edward and Winona Ryder's character are, all of the houses look very much alike. They all have a pastel color, could be mint green, could be peach, some kind of yellow, something like that. Green grass, blue sky, very colorful, and you can really see the animation side of Tim Burton. He plays a big part in the design of his movies. He does lots of sketches and things for the makeup people and for the costume people and so on. Very sadly, I missed a Tim Burton show at our county museum, and I really wish I had gone to that because lots of really great art and so on. One of my students showed me a big, beautiful hardcover book that she got from that show, and it's a sort of fine art book you want to put on white gloves or something when you turn the pages. Very beautiful book. I did catch the Kubrick show at the County Museum, so that was good. Anyway, back to Edward Scissorhands. We have the framing device with Winona Ryder, and we have the wonderful color scheme, the neighborhood down below it's not quite a mountain, but there's a castle high up on a hill and that's where the I guess mad scientist is, who's going to create life in a lab. And that whole world up there is stone and weathered wood and very monochromatic. There's hardly any color at all up there. Edward Scissorhands is always in black and white or gray, even when he comes down to the suburbia below. He's wearing gray pants and a white shirt over his black leather outfit that he's in. So we have that, right? We have the color scheme and all that, and we have a fish out of water. He is a strange creature, and we can get the fish out of water, or we do get the fish out of water theme in movies quite a lot. Anytime somebody goes somewhere where they are not at home, and it could be just leaving the country for the city, leaving the city for the country, going to Europe. It could be going really anywhere in the world on vacation somehow. What is it? The Hangover Part 2, where they go off to Thailand. Even with Avatar, leaving Earth and going to this strange world. So it's a great theme. It's used a lot. We sort of see this new world, whether it's the city or the country or Europe or Africa or whatever, through the eyes of the protagonist. I'm even thinking of National Lampoon's European Vacation. Okay, there's lots of these fish out of water themed movies. Here we're going to kind of see suburbia through Edward's eyes, almost like an anthropologist. Oh, look at the strange rituals they have, the backyard barbecue. And it's kind of fun to look at this stuff kind of from a distance. We live in these suburban neighborhoods, many of us, in modern day America, but it's interesting to look at modern day suburban America kind of as an outsider or an anthropologist or something like that. And that's one of the things that the fish out of water theme allows us to do. Okay, so Edward is the creation of I hate to call him a mad scientist. He looks pretty sane, but usually they're called mad scientists. And this, we've talked about this back when we talked about the stages of the genre film. We get the revisionist type films, like Frankenstein films. In Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, of course, Dr. Frankenstein was creating life in a lab, electricity and all that strange stuff. And I always have to remind everybody that Frankenstein is the doctor and his creation is the creature or the monster. And so it's Dr. Frankenstein and his monster. Anyway, today we would get, not exactly sure what Edward is. Oftentimes we would have robots or replicants or androids or cyborgs, whatever you want to call them. I think they're all kind of part and parcel. I guess androids have, I guess cyborgs and androids have flesh or something, or replicants and robots are all metal. I'm not really sure. I love sci-fi, but I'm not really sure what the difference is. But we get Blade Runner, and there is Rachel to the right there, and we get Westworld on HBO, and we get these wonderful sci-fi themes that sci-fi writers love to bring up. Lots of philosophy in sci-fi. I remember it's really good for allegory, if you remember 1984 and things like that. And so do these creations, do these creatures, do they have a soul? Are they killed or murdered? In Blade Runner, they are retired. Are these scientists playing God, creating life, doing something that only God should be able to do? Are the android replicant androids slaves? Okay, so all this stuff is brought up. Not too much in Edward Scissorhands, but definitely in Blade Runner and Westworld. So food for thought. Food for thought. All right, back to Tim and Johnny. Ed would is based on a real life person, Edward D. Wood Jr. He was a horror director, and he was known for being particularly awful. And there was a book that came out back, I think, in the 1980s or so, called it was the Golden Turkey Awards, or the 50 Worst Movies of All Time, I think it was. And Plan 9 from Outer Space was ranked, I guess, number 1 or number 50, or however you want to do it. And that was made by Ed Wood, and it made him sort of famous. There are lots of really bad movies out there. A lot of people know The Room, but there are lots and lots of really, really bad movies out there. I guess it's kind of fun to, make fun. Most of us don't even make movies, and these guys managed to at least make a movie, no matter how bad it is. So that made Ed Wood kind of famous, I guess, and Tim Burton became a fan. If you are interested, the entire Plan 9 from Outer Space is right there on YouTube for free. So you can watch the whole movie if you want. I've linked to it. I think I've linked to it. It's there, or at least the trailer. I guess if you want to watch the whole movie, you can do that. And the trailer looks so much like the stuff that Tim Burton shot for his movie within a movie, with Ed Wood making Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's really shot for shot and makeup and all that stuff. It's wonderful stuff. And Ed Wood had a very interesting. He loved these old guys just like Tim Burton does, and so he ran into, literally became friends with Bela Lugosi. And Bela Lugosi was the guy that played Dracula in the 1931 classic horror movie. Here we are, right here with the Bela Lugosi and the film. And I think this is Vampira. She was a 1950s LA TV hostess, and Saturday night at midnight showing horror movies. That was rather common around the country. Universal, a lot of other studios too, Universal started releasing their movies in packages that television could pick up and rent. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before, maybe not, but television really resurrected a lot of old movies and cartoons and all sorts of stuff. All those Bugs Bunny cartoons, they were made for movie theaters. They would have just kind of gone away if it weren't for television. And also various serials got resurrected on television. And all of these wonderful horror films. They started appearing on TV in the late 50s. Universal sold a whole package to television. And it brought them, brought them out of the dusty storage where they were, and people got to rediscover these wonderful movies from the 1930s, 20, 25, 30 years later. So if it weren't for television, a lot of early movies, all those great movies, they kind of would have been lost or forgotten. Then, of course, after television, staying along with home video, we get VHS and DVDs and streaming and all that. But TV, just regular old TV, really saved a lot of this stuff from the dustbins of history. So this movie is in black and white, and there are some pretty good directors and some pretty good movies made in black and white. I wanted to call attention to that. There's a few of these groupings that I like to call attention to. The directors who have worked in black and white, the directors who have worked in stop motion animation, and Tim Burton is in that club as well. And I think I've got another grouping of actors who became directors, with people like Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford and people like that, Jodie Foster, people like that. So this is the directors who have worked in black and white, modern directors. All the directors in the 30s and 40s worked in black and white, and many in the 1950s and 60s. I don't have Stanley Kubrick because 1964, Dr. Strangelove, that was still a period when a lot of people were working in black and white. It wasn't quite 100% color until the late 60s. So yeah, there we go. Modern directors working in black and white. Back to Tim Burton. A few more films you've probably heard of. Mars Attacks, which is a lot of fun. It's very goofy. It's actually based on a bubblegum trading card, just like baseball trading cards, but there was a Mars Attacks series of trading cards. Sleepy Hollow, based on the American story there from the early days, Revolutionary War days, all that way back when. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake, Big Fish, Sweeney Todd, Alice in Wonderland, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and Dumbo. So you can watch Dumbo. Maybe you didn't know it was a Tim Burton movie. You might check that out as well. And the last time I checked the Internet Movie Database, it had a listing for Beetlejuice 2. And I don't know what the status of that is. I would be very excited to see Beetlejuice 2. The original Beetlejuice is a really fun movie. And Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, and Alec Baldwin, and Winona Ryder. So good film. I'd love to see that as, I guess, not really. I guess a sequel. I guess a sequel is what it would be. So Tim Burton has also worked in stop motion. And when we get up, I think when we get up to Wes Anderson, I will list the other directors who have worked in stop motion. But Tim has 3 under his belt. And again, I think this dates to his love of animation. And he didn't do animation. I don't think he did stop motion. He did animation. I don't think he did stop motion at Cal Arts, but he has a love of all of that and ghoulish things. The Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie, very much in the Tim Burton wheelhouse about resurrections and things like that. Frankenweenie, about a dog that is resurrected from the dead. I love the dog's name too, Sparky. Okay, so paying much homage to the Frankenstein movies. And I've linked to the Nightmare Before Christmas trailer, but all 3 of these movies are really a lot of fun. So check those out too, right? You can watch any of those movies for any of your papers. If you're into animation, that sort of thing, then that's fine too. Next up, Paul Thomas Anderson, known as mostly P.T. Anderson. And he's known for moving his camera and long takes and big casts. This is a pretty good cast here. We see Mark Wahlberg and lots of future Oscar winners and Oscar nominees and so on. This is Boogie Nights. It has all that. It has all that, big cast and all that. And it is about the adult film industry. It's an R-rated movie, so don't worry about that. But it is set in the 1970s during the boogie era, Saturday Night Fever era, and we have at least 2 really nice scenes of long tracking shots, oneers they're called by some people. Usually it's usually somebody with a Steadicam following the action, and the movie opens up that way in at a disco, and then there's a wonderful scene at a backyard pool party with most of these people and even more, the camera sort of wanders around, and the point is that us in the audience feel like we're there. We're walking into the nightclub and we're looking around and seeing these people and saying hi to everybody. And when we're at the pool party, it's kind of the same thing, just sort of wandering around and seeing people swimming and talking and drinking and all of that. And so I think the Steadicam and the long tracking shot takes really does that for us. Martin Scorsese likes to do this sort of thing too. We might talk about him, and later on we will talk about two films that appear to not have any edits in them whatsoever, Birdman and 1917. So those movies are both on the horizon. In the meantime, check out the scenes that I have for you on Boogie Nights. It's a real fun film. P.T. Anderson's second or third film. There's a list: Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, The Master, Inherent Vice, The Phantom Thread. And one of the things that I like, or one of the things I try to impress in this class, is that we talk about directors a lot. And we talk about the movies and some of their best movies and things, but it's a very director-centric class, very auteur-driven. And sometimes it's interesting to see that, oh, the director of that film that I like also directed these other films. Maybe I'll check those out as well. So when we see one Martin Scorsese film, or a Tim Burton film, or a P.T. Anderson film, or a Wes Anderson film, two Andersons, sorry about that, but two Andersons, then I hope that you will be interested in tracking down other films, even though that might not be your favorite genre. It might be a Western, who knows what it will be, but if it's by a director that you like, then I hope you'll check it out. That's really how I watch movies. I mean, I see certain genres and things that I like, but I will see something that I never would think I would like if it's by a director that I'm interested in. So that's one of the things I hope you get out of this class and this discussion. Okay, next up, two of my very favorites. Boy, I just love these guys. I love their sense of humor and the way they go about things. There's a great line right there: stupid people doing stupid things, that describes so many of their movies. And I like their sense of humor. It's not exactly slapstick. It's not exactly dry or verbal. I don't know what it is, but I love the Coen Brothers sense of humor: regional, dry, fast talking, and most everything about the Coen Brothers I have found in the Big Lebowski. So they've won Oscars and things for other movies. Fargo for screenplay, and not There Will Be Blood. Oh gee, I'm drawing a blank here. How could that be? I'm gonna have to skip to it. No Country for Old Men. I'm going too fast. I'm going a mile a minute here. Okay. No Country for Old Men, Best Picture, Best Directors, Best Screenplay. So they won 3 Oscars for that one. A little bit of a darker film. There's bits of humor in all their movies, I think, but definitely violence, even though they tend to make rather funny films. There's always violence in them. Inside Llewyn Davis, there's just a punch in the nose, I guess. There's not a whole lot of violence, but other movies, even their comedies, like The Big Lebowski or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, some kind of violence. And very importantly, they produce and they direct and they write and they edit their films. And if you look at the credits, their names, maybe they thought that was too much. So there's somebody else is always listed. They always list Roderick Jaynes as their editor, but that's them. And they have final cut, and that's a really big deal. A lot of directors want that. It's a real sign of confidence and respect that the studios, who are spending millions of dollars on these movies, can give a director. And if you can earn it, like I'm sure Steven Spielberg and Scorsese and people like that, it's a real big deal. Sometimes you can say, well, this movie has to be 3 hours long. I'm sorry, but this is a 3 hour long movie. Studios do not like 3 hour long movies. They like to be able to get as many showings in per day in the theaters as they can. But if you're Martin Scorsese and The Wolf of Wall Street is a 3 hour movie, then you have final cut and you get to do that. So Coen Brothers don't usually go long like that, but if you negotiate that, then you can say, you know, this movie is going to need to be R, it's going to need to be this long, and I have the final say. And it's a pretty big deal. You don't want to abuse that. You don't want to push the envelope and say, my contract says I can make, you know, an NC-17 rated 4 hour movie. You really don't want to push that too far, or it'll be the last time you get to negotiate for a final cut. But if you're responsible and so on, then you get final cut. And the Coen Brothers and like I mentioned, those other directors, a lot of the directors in this class, frankly, have final cut. I'm sure Christopher Nolan has final cut. A lot of those people. And the other thing about the Coen Brothers, and I group them in specifically with Clint Eastwood and Woody Allen, in that they make movies quite fast, every maybe year and a half or so, and that's pretty fast. And they keep their budgets quite low, like $30 million, maybe between 10 and 30, which is, believe it or not, a low budget Hollywood movie with all of these big giant franchise movies, whether it's a James Bond movie or a Fast and Furious movie or an Avengers movie, upwards of $250 to $300 million. Then a $30 million movie is like, hey buddy, can you lend me a 20? Okay, it seems like, sure, what the heck, here I can fund that movie with my credit card and my wallet. So studios love these guys. They all win lots of awards. Woody and Clint and Joel and Ethan, they all win lots of awards. They keep their budget low, and the studios like that, right? Studios really like that. Now, it's not a big gamble. Right? The studios would love to make a $200 million movie that makes $1 billion. Okay, they love that. They love that even more. But Oscars and things like that are also on the list of things that studios like to get. So The Big Lebowski, it has a film noir plot, believe it or not. And there's the dude right here, Jeff Bridges as the dude, and it is a cult hit, very much a cult hit. There are Big Lebowski fan clubs, Big Lebowski bowling tournaments, where people dress up like characters in the Big Lebowski and drink his favorite drink, which is a White Russian. What is it? Vodka and Kahlua and cream, and he's a pothead. Okay, so anyway, it is their most beloved film. Yes, they won Oscars for Fargo and No Country for Old Men and other things like that, but this is really the one that everybody loves. And I guess I got this online here. How often are people dropping the F-bomb or dude or whatever? But there they are at the bowling alley, where some key scenes are set, and we get the repeated dialogue and things like that, and so on. And I've linked as close as I can. The downside of being all the way online is I don't quite have total command of what scenes are shown. YouTube is so fantastic. They have just about everything I want, but sometimes they don't run quite as long as I might like. And normally I would just show about the first 20 minutes or 25 minutes of The Big Lebowski, and I can't quite do it with YouTube, but I think I've got the scenes in the right order. Yeah, I think I've got them in the right order, and you kind of get that feel for the Big Lebowski. If you like the Big Lebowski, I would recommend Oh Brother, Where Art Thou as another really good one in that sort of that same vein. And also, Hail Caesar is their most recent feature-length film. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is an anthology. It's 6 different stories, and that one appeared on Netflix. There we go. So there we go. No Country, Oscar, writing, directing, and Best Picture. That's kind of their big one there. But like I say, their beloved movies would be Fargo. Everybody loves Fargo, and definitely Big Lebowski and Oh Brother. So and for me, Hail Caesar kind of fits in there quite nicely, I think. And a lot of them you can track down. They're streaming, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, whatever. They're not hard to track these down. So you might enjoy a Coen Brothers film for your next paper, or just for fun, for downtime. And there we go. That's it for today. Cine 104, History of Motion Pictures. We are up into the 90s, creeping into the 90s, ever so deliberately. Class 11 of, I guess, 15, something like that, 15 or 16. We're getting closer and closer to the present day. So thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, Professor Dave Eccles saying, have a good one.